Thanks so much for your time. So the Financial Markets Summit taking place next week. Why in South Africa? Ray.
So we host the Financial Markets Indaba in what we term to be the three most important cities to Zimbabwe's capital markets. That is Harare, London, and Johannesburg. So by any measure, Johannesburg is the most important city to Zimbabwe's capital markets. And as well, we have a large diaspora of Zimbabwean professionals living here, business people. So it just makes sense for us to do a conference here focused on Zimbabwe.
So what are we expecting to come from it?
Well, for us, how we've been doing our conferences is that they are very much panel-driven and conversation, with the intent that you can generate business development, deal origination within the conversations. So what you can expect robust and candid conversations about what is happening in Zimbabwe in terms of the opportunities and the risks themselves, and where people are seeing some of the biggest returns coming from. So for example, one of our topics, panel topics, which is going to be very much favored with a lot of people, is where will returns come from? Is that from the public markets, from infrastructure, from tourism, from agriculture? I think those are some of the questions that we will be answering.
And Teresa, what's your take on Zimbabwe now that the political landscape has changed?
I think investors are always looking at management as a key factor when thinking about making an investment. That's sort of management or investment 101. And so the winds of change in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and Angola have made investors take a second look because of the big changes of leadership at the political level in the highest seats. I think what Zimbabwe has to offer that's different from some of the other opportunities is the fact that Zimbabwe has a history and a legacy of a very well-educated populace in order to fill those new investment opportunities. Someone has to manage them. It's one thing to be able to attract investment from foreigners based on these macroeconomic trends, but once that investment is placed, who is going to manage these investments? And I think that Zimbabwe has a very large diaspora that has not been able to be productive at home and has been spread throughout the world, in Southern Africa in particular. And when those members of the diaspora who have strong management talent see opportunities at home, they can return home and contribute to the dividend that this new investment will provide.
Okay, so they have the skills, or highly skilled workforce as their advantage, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that country.
There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but I also think that there's a lot of momentum that is coming into this as well. 2017 was a very strong year for Zimbabwe. One can argue as to why these things occurred, but in 2017, before the change in leadership, we'd already seen an increase in exports by 37% coming out of Zimbabwe. International tourism into Victoria Falls was also up by over 30%. The production of gold was already up by almost 20%. And so I think that many aspects of the economy were just waiting for that change to take place. No one knew exactly how or why or when, but there's been a sense of anticipation relative to the Zimbabwean economy for some time.
Ray, how did you guys decide on some of the headlines and the things that will be discussed? Because I see that the currency is one of the things that will be discussed, as is the investment climate, particularly in the mining sector. So how did you guys come about this?
So as I said, Fifi, we've been doing this for the past 3 years, even when Zimbabwe, the term Zimbabwe now ready for business was not fashionable, because Zimbabwe wasn't. So over the time, we've been tracking opportunities and risks across Zimbabwe. And at our platforms, these conferences, we were taking surveys to understand what are people most concerned about Zimbabwe. So these topics sort of emerge out of those conversations, out of those concerns that the global investor community has. So for example, how do we de-risk investing in resource-based projects? That's a very important thing. I think the current government now, the new leadership is very much focused on those things, removing some of those restrictive requirements on indigenization. Now we only have diamond and platinum as only 2 minerals, and I'm thinking they'll also they'll soon take out platinum out of the minerals that they require indigenization. So for us, this is really engaging with the people and say, what is it that is so important about Zimbabwe? what are the risks that you are so concerned about? And then from that, then we try to script topics that we now come up with.
I mean, if you received interest for the Indaba even before the change in the political dispensation, I suppose it goes without saying that now that things look a lot more secure, this year's Indaba is going to be particularly well attended.
Precisely. I mean, I think it also tells us why we are here, for the first time, in 3 years as well. It's a testament that the spotlight now is on Zim, and I think we're very excited that the 1st of March will be a very exciting day for us in terms of the conversations, the discussions, the deal making that will occur on that day.
Teresa, I was speaking to one of the bosses of the platinum miners, and I was asking him about, now that Zimbabwe is looking a lot better, is this something that you would want to consider? And he says that, even though there's been this change in this political dispensation, there was still a lot of caution. So he was still adopting a kind of wait and see approach before, tying down any more money there. I mean, how do you view the situation?
I think that the world is looking at Zimbabwe as an opportunity, and so those who wait will just simply see lower returns. Those who get in early will be at an advantage.
But what are your concerns, though?
I think the concerns are the concerns as you've already identified. I think that there's still a number of policies that have yet to be defined. We have to look at whatever Zimbabwe's equivalent of South Africa's Black Economic Empowerment policy looks like. I think that that's one of the concerns that the world wants to understand before putting money in the ground. I think that there are a number of very significant factors that could curtail all of the optimism. But I think that in most situations, when people get in early, when things are unclear, that provides the greatest opportunity, and that's what I see in Zimbabwe.
Ray, just a final question. I mean, who are some of the delegates that we can expect there?
So over the years, we've been very much private sector oriented and focused, but this year we've sort of a very assortment of politicians, public figures, and private individuals. So for example, we have the Deputy Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Honorable Terence Mkupe, very young and vibrant professional who has done well in the financial sector, coming in to have a conversation, in fact, with Teresa Clarke. We also have a very interesting figure, Chris Mchangwa, who's the special advisor to the president of Zimbabwe. So he's a man who has stood with the president over the past years, and it's interesting, I mean, as an advisor to hear his insights on how open is Zimbabwe open for business. We also have Trevor Nguyo, who's chairman for AMH. You will recall him, he was here chairman for Melengaiden here. So he will be also giving his perspective on the economics and the politics of Zimbabwe. I think they have got the largest publication, and they probably have a good view of what is happening on ground. On the private sector, we have, I must say, we have now focused more on the young and upcoming individuals who are doing very well. For example, we have Simba Muriro, who runs Oxygen Africa. He has been on various international platforms. He's running one of the first rooftop renewable projects in Zimbabwe. We have Donovan Chimanamba, I think he's been in the press with DIDG. We have individuals such as professionals such as Brian Mangwiro, who's with Barings, a senior director, and several individuals, young people that are doing some of those things that we are not recognized by the incumbents or by the public.
A whole host of speakers there. Let's just leave it there for now. We'll be catching up with you next week at the Indaba. Of course, that was Teresa Clarke, who's the CEO of Africa.com, and Ray Chipendo, who's Business Development Executive at the Financial Markets Indaba.